Hey guys, it's Cece, and in case you didn't already know, it's October now. October is basically my favorite time of the year, so I hope you enjoy my Halloween decorations. I'm very excited about them, and in Utah we completely skipped fall. It went from like 80 degrees Fahrenheit one week to 40 this week, which is why I'm already in my sweater. I wasn't ready to pull the sweaters out yet. I had other fall clothes to get to first, but this is where we are. So today I am going to be doing my September wrap-up of all of the books I read in the month of September. I read a grand total of 6 books, and all 6 of them were 2017 releases. 5 of those were ARCs, and 1 of them came out back in March, so it's a finished copy. I think that's all you need to know. I'm going to be doing mini reviews. I'm going to start with my least favorite book of the month and work up to my highest rated favorite book of the month. Let's get going. So sadly, my least favorite book of September was A Line in the Dark by Malinda. This is a YA thriller and it is coming out on October 17th. This book is about a girl named Jess Wong, and she has harbored an unrequited crush on her best friend Angie for years. And then Angie starts to fall for a girl named Margot who goes to a nearby boarding school. Jess really feels that there is something darker beneath the surface of Margot's exterior, and Angie isn't believing her. They start to get more and more embroiled in the world of this boarding school as secrets come out, and it leads to a very tense situation. It is about queer ladies, like the 3 main girls in the story are all queer, plus the main character herself is Chinese American. I think the problem with this book is that it's being billed as a psychological thriller, and I feel like it is more of a character study than necessarily something thrilling. There's tension building, but it's not very thrilling. It's just character-driven tension between these 3 girls who all have these intense feelings and they don't know how to deal with them, and eventually it turns into a psychological thriller. But that kind of leaves this disconnect between the first half of the book and the second half of the book. I will say that from a character study perspective, I really enjoyed this book. Jess was a fascinating main character. She's an artist, so this also features a lot of focus on a comic that she's doing, a supernatural, very Buffy-style comic. I absolutely loved that. Plus, I thought the rep was fantastic. It took until page 18 for girls to get together and watch Imagine Me and You, which is like the most queer girl activity of all. I also liked that considering this was a thriller with queer main characters, there weren't big sexuality plot twists and moments when people were in danger or threatened because of their sexuality. I feel like that can happen. I was really worried about characters being outed and that was going to become a big plot point, but I should have known Malinda Lo wouldn't let me down in that regard. I just feel like the pacing was off in this book, and when it came to the conclusion at the end, it was kind of a letdown after some of the builds that had been happening. So while there was stuff that I liked about this book, ultimately I had to give it a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up we have Warcross by Marie Lu. This book is already out. It came out in September, and I've gone and I've visited the hardcover at bookstores because it is beautiful. It's this really light blue under the cover that I love. Anyway, this is a sci-fi book about a girl named Emika Chen. This takes place in the future where a game called Warcross has taken over. It's a virtual reality game that almost everyone plays. And Emika is a hacker. When she hacks herself into the opening ceremonies of the Warcross games, she accidentally reveals her identity and is then hired by the creator of Warcross to get to the bottom of a person who seems to be threatening the game. So the world of Warcross is a virtual reality, but the Warcross games themselves are this huge event. It brings together teams from all over the world that battle each other to get to the end of the competition, win the Warcross title. And that was easily my favorite aspect of this book. Warcross was such a fun and interesting game to read about. It feels like element battles in A Gathering of Shadows or something like Legend of Korra. Sometimes with fictional games, they can get kind of confusing to read about, in my opinion. It's hard to follow all of the moving parts. It's hard to write all of the moving parts, but this was done so well. I never felt lost when I was reading, and I understood the rules, and they were just fascinating and inventive. This book was also incredibly diverse. The main character's Chinese American, the love interest is Japanese, there's a disabled side character, other side characters of various ethnicities, and some hinting at potential future confirmed queer characters. Overall, this was so much fun to read. It was engaging and interesting, and the world building was phenomenal. phenomenal. I just think that this suffers from a slightly weaker ending. When it got to the end, I felt like there kept being these plot twists that felt really tropey. So the first 3/4 of this book was such an easy 4. I was really excited to read the next one, but the end soured it just a tiny bit for me, which wound up making me knock my rating down to a 3.5. I'm still really curious about the sequels, and I think this has the potential to be a fantastic series. It didn't land on the ending quite as well as I was hoping. Now on to Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. This book comes out on October 10th, and it is an East Asian-inspired reimagining of The Evil Queen. So it's about a girl named Shi Fang, and she has always been told that she is destined to become the Empress, but there are a lot of things that stand in her way, and if she wants to reach that point in her life, she's going to have to embrace the darkness within herself. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the entire year, and I think it is such an interesting start to a series. I don't know if this is going to be a duology or a trilogy, but I'm definitely excited for the next book regardless. It was a little slow to start for me, but the reason for that is because it's a villain origin story, and you have to go through so much with Shi Fang to understand where she is headed, and to see the different points that she reaches along her journey as she becomes less and less of a good person. Like, in all honesty, if you have a thing for villain origin stories, for villains, for morally great characters, and for retellings, any and all of these things, it would be a good reason for you to pick up Forest of a Thousand Lanterns. It was gorgeously written, full of magic, full of characters that I think are really going to develop as the story goes on, and I wound up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Moving right along, let's talk about Not Your Villain by C.B. Lee. This comes out on October 5th, so just a couple of days. This book is the sequel to Not Your Sidekick. This series is called The Sidekick Squad. It's basically about queer superheroes, and it's fantastic. I just barely posted an interview that I did with C.B. Lee. We filmed it way back in June, but it just barely went up yesterday if you want to go check it out. We talk about this book, we talk about Sidekick, there's our favorite female-female relationships, representation and diversity in fiction, and a ton more, so go check that out if you want to learn more. Not Your Villain is about a trans guy named Bells, and can I just talk about the fact that I am holding a book with a black trans guy on the cover, because it's magical. If you loved the first book, Not Your Sidekick, you are going to love the second book. Full of all of the same characters that I loved from Sidekick, plus we got to focus a lot more on Bells since he has become the main character, and I loved seeing his development more up close instead of from just Jess's perspective. He's snarky and sweet, and I love the friendship in this book. This is the ultimate friendship gang. This was just a great sequel that I absolutely adored reading, and I already can't wait for the third book in the series, which is going to be about Emma. I feel like it's so mean to talk about sequels when the book itself hasn't even officially been released yet, but that's just where my mind is at. And I loved this, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, a very fitting sequel. Okay, getting into the top 2, my second favorite book of September was Jade Unlimited by Kristin Cashore. This book has also already been released. It was released in September, and it has been so covered in post-it notes. This book is basically about a girl named Jane, and she's been raised by her aunt her whole life, and then her aunt dies. Jane drops out of college, is feeling very adrift, and then an old friend invites her to her family's mansion. Before her aunt died, she made Jane promise that if she was ever invited to this family's island that she would go, and so she does, and she is faced with a choice. 5 options lie before her, and each one will lead her down a drastically different path. I fell in love so hard with this weird-ass book. What's bizarre is that it has elements of like a gothic classic while also kind of being a choose-your-own-adventure novel. In the back of this book, Kristin Cashore talks about how she was inspired by books like Jane Eyre and Rebecca, but like I said, this is a choose-your-own-adventure novel. There is build-up, and then there are 5 sections, and each section is a different version of the choice that Jane makes, and each of those sections is a different genre of book. There's a version that feels more gothic, there's a sci-fi outcome, fantasy, psychological horror, but what it keeps coming back to is that this is a book about decisions and about grief and reckoning with the people in your past. And I just fell so hard for it, and I immediately wanted to reread it because of the way that the story is interwoven. And what's so excellent is that in all of the different versions, the drastically different versions of her life that you see Jane go through, you can also see these hints of the fact that if she'd made those other choices, that other version that you read might still have happened. It's just interwoven beautifully. I have loved Kristin Cashore for years, since she wrote the Graceling Realm trilogy, and what an incredible addition to Kristin Cashore's books. It's weird and wonderful, and it made me cry and laugh, and it's about a queer girl. I almost forgot that it's about a queer girl. That's honestly gotta tell you how good this book is, that I, of all people, forgot to mention that Jane spends a lot of these different versions of her life crushing on another girl, and there are a lot of various versions of how that goes for her. Seriously, I adored this. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. If I reread it, maybe that rating could change up or down, but I absolutely loved it, and I am begging you to go and read this book. It's so good. And finally, my favorite book that I read in the month of September was A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. This is the third and final book in a series about parallel worlds and the people who can travel between them. It's also a series that includes pirates, element battles, magic, royalty. There's more. I think the second book, A Gathering of Shadows, has a real issue with pacing that I think this book improved upon so greatly. This book is like 600 pages long. It starts and it just doesn't stop. Plus, I sometimes have a hard time coming to the conclusion of a series. It's always a risky move, but I think this one was done perfectly. It wrapped up character storylines in a way that felt concluded, but also realistic. In war, in battle, you lose things, and I feel like this book accurately reflected that. Plus, it had 2 romances that had me dying. Specifically, there is a male-male romance in here that I absolutely adore. Rai is my favorite character in this series, so it's really good he became a main character, because he wasn't in the first book. It's good that he got more time, because he's my favorite. But he has a romance, and it's so good. I also cried through this one. I cried like 4 times or something. This was an incredible conclusion to this trilogy, and I am so glad that we're getting more books in this series. I actually got to meet V.E. Schwab when she came to Salt Lake Comic Con. I met her once before, last year when the Savage song came out, but I went and met her just a couple of weeks ago again. She signed my copy of A Conjuring of Light as well as my copy of A Gathering of Shadows, and we talked about Threads of Magic, the new trilogy that's going to be set in the Shades of Magic world. It's going to be set like 5 to 10 years in the future, but it's going to be about new characters. However, all of the characters that lived through this series will make an appearance, and I cannot wait for all of those books. And unsurprisingly, after all this raving, I gave A Conjuring of Light 5 out of 5 stars, and the Shades of Magic series definitely cemented itself as one of my favorites ever. Okay guys, there you go! Those are all of the books that I read in the month of September. What do you think of the books I read and the reviews that I gave them? What was your favorite book that you read in the month of September? Let me know any and all of those things down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!